Hey guys, so this is narrative writing day 2. Our targets today are 1. I can write about an event in the order in which it occurred. So we're going to be writing about an event, so the big moment that we talked about yesterday or that you decided yesterday during your brainstorm, and describe it in the way that it occurred or happened. Our second target is I can utilize transition words while writing a personal narrative. So we're going to use transition words like first, then, or last while we're writing our personal narratives. That way it goes in order and it makes sense. So this is a reminder of what a personal narrative is. A personal narrative is a story that happened in your own life. You choose one big moment that you want to talk about. So we did this yesterday during our brainstorm. You should have thought about one big moment that you wanted to write about and 3 details that happened during that big moment. So those 3 details will describe that big moment and make it into a personal narrative. So before we can start writing our personal narrative, we have to include a topic sentence. So the topic sentence introduces the big moment. A topic sentence is a sentence that gives the big moment or idea of what we are writing about. So it explains what our big moment is going to be in our writing. It is usually the first sentence in a personal narrative. So this first sentence is really important because it can grab the reader's attention. We want them to be like, oh hey, look, this narrative is really interesting. Let's go ahead and finish reading it. So an example of a topic sentence is this. One day I was at the park. Another example would be, I went to the grocery store and it was so much fun. So these are examples of what you could talk about and place in where your story was taking place. Alright, so now let's talk about our 3 details, or our seed ideas. So during our details, we have to use transition words. Transition words are words that help you get to the next point or idea. So the transition words that we use are first, then or next, and last. These are to include details in your personal narrative. So these transition words allow you to keep your thoughts organized. So here's an example. You can say first, this happened, then that happened, and last, the end happened. So these are the 3 ways to keep your ideas and details in order of how they happen in your big moment. After our details, we want to have a closing sentence. This closing sentence is a sentence that ends your whole personal narrative. It is the last sentence that brings the story to a close. So an example of a closing sentence could be, after that day, I never wanted to go to the store again. Or, it was a fantastic day at the park. So these are things that could really close your narrative writing and make it interesting and kind of end it off on a positive or a final note. So now that we've learned everything that we need for narrative writing, we need to make sure that we start our first draft. In a first draft, we need to think about our brainstorm topic that we came up with yesterday. So this is the big moment that you want to write about for your personal narrative. Your personal narrative should be about one moment that really is important to you. In yesterday's video, I came up with the big moment of riding my bike and falling off. So today I'll be using that big moment to help me write my personal narrative. So the first thing we need to think about for our first draft is our big moment and the 3 details that we're going to use. let's get started. So I created an outline for my personal narrative writing. I started with my big moment that I chose yesterday during our brainstorm. My big moment I chose was riding my bike and falling off. So this is what I'll be talking about, or the main idea or event that I'll be talking about in my personal narrative. I then started to talk about my topic sentence. So the topic sentence is the sentence that hooks in the reader or gets the reader excited about what they're going to read. So what I wrote was, one day I was at the park riding my bike. This gets the reader ready to learn that I was at the park riding my bike. I then talked about my 3 details. These details are things that happen in that big moment. When you write your details, you want to make sure that you have your transitions. Your transition words are your first, next, and last. I started with first. I was riding my bike way too fast. Next, I realized there was a stick on the path, but not quick enough. Last, I was falling to the ground and I broke my arm. Once you have those 3 details down, you can move into your closing sentence. This closing sentence allows you to get your final words in and kind of close up the whole entire story. My closing sentence for this outline was, I had to go to the doctor's and was put in a cast. So this is the outline I would use to be able to write my first draft of my personal narrative story. So before we get into our last bit of our slideshow, let's talk about our target one more time. So our target was to write about an event in the order in which it occurred. So we did talk about our transition words that help us get those events in order, or those details in order, to make the big moment make sense. You could see in my outline that I had my transition words in my outline to help me understand which details goes first, next, and last. Our last target was, I can use those transition words while writing a personal narrative. So like I said before, we use those words to help us organize our writing and let it make sense. We use those transition words first, next, and last to help us organize our writing. So before you start your first draft, you might want to grab a pencil and paper so that you can write your outline. You can pause the video now and get your outline ready. Alright, now let's talk about a first draft. Here's my first draft. You can see that the first sentence is my topic sentence. It's getting us ready to talk about that we were riding my bike at the park. So my first sentence says, one day I was at the park riding my bike. Then you can see my first transition word of first. First, I was riding my bike way too fast. That's my first detail I had on my outline. Next, I realized there was a stick on the path, but not quick enough. So here's my second detail I had on my outline. Last thing I knew, I was falling to the ground and I broke my arm. So here's that last transition word and last detail. And the last sentence is our closing sentence. I had to go to the doctor's and was put in a cast. So this tells you about the event of me riding my bike in the park and falling off. It gives you details about the first thing that happened, the next thing, and the last thing that happened. It also has a sentence that kind of sums up the whole entire event. Alright friends, you're going to be able to try to write your first draft. At the bottom of this page, you'll have 2 questions to answer and then write your first draft write down in the form below. Once you think you're done with your personal narrative, come back to this slide and see if you have each part of this checklist done. So let's think about what I wrote for my personal narrative first draft and see if I have each of these check marks. Do I have a topic sentence? I do have a topic sentence. It's that first sentence explaining what is happening. So I can put a check mark there. Do I have 3 details? I did have 3 details describing my big moment. Does each detail start with a transition word? It did start with a transition word. I had first, then, and last. Do I have a closing sentence? I do have a closing sentence. It was that last sentence that said I had to go to the doctor's and get my arm in a cast. And lastly, is there a total of 5 sentences? There was a total of 5 sentences, so I can check that right off. So when you're done with your personal narrative, you can come back to this video and double check with this checklist to make sure you have each of those things. Alright friends, good luck. You guys got this, and I cannot wait to read your first drafts of your personal narrative. So now it is your turn. Think about the topic you chose for your brainstorm yesterday. So you want to think about that big moment that you'll be talking about in your personal writing. So that's the first thing you want to do. That will be what you'll be writing about in your personal narrative. Once you've figured out your topic, you'll want to grab a piece of paper to create an outline. So you can always refer back to this slide in video to figure out how to write an outline and get your topic sentence, your details, and your closing sentence. In total, you should have 5 sentences. This will help make sure that your personal narrative is full of details and explaining the big moment that happened that you want to tell others about. Once you have your outline complete, you're going to type up your first draft. So below you'll see a part where you can write your first draft and tell us about your big moment that you wanted to share with the rest of the class. You guys are going to do a great job, and make sure that you come back to this video to help you remember how to organize your personal narrative writing.